We would now like to start the Defending the Universal Values in Indo-Pacific Public Symposium. Those attending in person, we have simultaneous interpretation. For Japanese, please switch to channel 1. For English, channel 2. And also for the online people, the same applies. First, we would like to have the opening remarks from President Mr. Akio Okara, President of JCIE. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Akio Okara of Japan Center for International Exchange. Today, at the very end of the fiscal year, amidst your very busy schedule, I am very grateful for your attendance. As introduced by the moderator, we have a hybrid style symposium with those online and also in person. And we are very honored to be able to use this beautiful room, courtesy of Honorable Abe. And today we have also Ambassador Emmanuel and other embassy-related personnel from various embassies in Tokyo. And we have also the panelists who will be giving the presentations later on. At Japan Center for International Exchange, we were established in 1970. We have a history of now over 50 years and have tackled issues of global interest to domestic interest involving various sector professionals from various sectors. And today, we are focusing on democracy, which is a topic we have been tackling since 2018. And we have been trying to discuss the roles that Japan can play in promoting democracy. And under the leadership of Ambassador Takasu, we have been promoting this project. And this year, Japan has the presidency of the G7 summit. And we would like to focus our discussion on what Japan can be playing as the head of the G7 summit. Amongst the many global issues, we feel that democracy is a very important issue that should be discussed in depth, and we hope this will be a given opportunity for all of us to be involved in this discussion. So thank you for attending. Next, we would like to move right on and have Honorable again Nakatani, who is a special advisor to the Prime Minister. With Honorable Nakatani, he has been very, very cooperative, supportive of our project, and I am very grateful for all the support he has given us. So please have the floor. Hello, everybody. I am the special advisor to the Prime Minister in charge of the human rights and security issues. Today, hosted by the Japan Center for International Exchange, is the public symposium on defending universal values in Indo-Pacific, roles of Japan, and the G7 summit. And I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak on this occasion. Today, we have the presence of Ambassador Emmanuel and many, many experts from the academia, the embassies, in various sectors. And we hope that this will be an opportunity for all of us to have an active discussion to give out messages to the world. And before I was appointed special advisor to the Prime Minister, I have been chairing the Nonpartisan Parliamentary Association for Reconsidering Human Rights Diplomacy. The reason why I have been promoting human rights diplomacy is that there seems to be a big shift in the global world that has been shifting away from democracy and which has been threatening some of the security in the world. And we need to have universal values to uphold the international order. And for Japan and other countries, we need to cooperate with the United States, Australia, other countries of democratic origin, and we want to also collaborate with other countries in the neighborhood in order to promote our collaboration to overcome economic, political issues and secure a peaceful and stabilized region in this area. We feel that freedom, democracy, human rights, rule of law are all universal values that are now being threatened. And since Prime Minister had been taken office in 2021, he has decided that human rights is a very important issue, and that's why I have been appointed as a special advisor on this issue. So it is the Japanese government's intention to be seriously involved in this issue. Last year, Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Chinese invasion into our territorial waters, and North Korea's missile launches. There have been many military conflicts and provocations. In January this year, there was the bilateral U.S.-Japan summit, and I have been able to accompany the Prime Minister to the meeting, and we talked about how to ensure peace and stability in the world by upholding freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law, and that we need to collaborate even further. And it was both sides have decided to commit to this belief. Recently, Prime Minister Kishida visited Ukraine and had talked with President Zelensky to show the unshakable solidarity with the Ukrainian citizens by visiting in person and seeing firsthand what is going on in Ukraine and hoping to lead the other countries as the president of the G7 summit to have global solidarity in bringing stability. At the beginning of this month, I went to Geneva to attend the UN Human Rights Council to seek Russian fulfillment of obligations under the international laws. But so far, the brutal and inhumane acts by the Russian forces have continued in Ukraine and killing many innocent civilians. We feel that this is not to be permitted. Respect of human rights and rules of law is very important. Japan, after the post-World War II, we have maintained a very pacifist, peace-led country that respects freedom and democratic virtues, and we would like to seek the same in Russia. The human rights is the norms of the international orders are universal, and we feel that it's very, very important that innocent civilians should not be victims of being violation of human rights. And this is a challenge to the international standards. We feel that it is threatening the international order. Japan is always trying to keep an eye open for all the people in the world to have their human rights respected, giving legal support, strengthening media and journalism, extending support to women and children, those in vulnerable positions. For example, in Cambodia, we have tried to give legal support and election support, fostering legal professionals and also promoting dialogues, submission of human rights status resolution to the United Nations. And we have also worked together with the U.S., European countries, NGOs, and the Cambodian government in order to promote respect for human rights. As for the Russian invasion on Ukraine, we think we need to collaborate even further with the G7 countries. In Japan, we have accepted 2,300 refugees from Ukraine, and we have hoping that with good practice, we could expand the basis for a world that would respect universal values. Human rights, freedom, democracy, and rule of law should be respected throughout the world. But to improve the human rights issue is not something we can do overnight. Japan would need to raise its voice while respecting the various different historical and cultural backgrounds that each country has. And through bilateral and international dialogues, we try to promote their voluntary efforts to further human rights. We are hoping to weave different threads. This is the way that the Japanese diplomacy should work with respect to the various different cultures and historical backgrounds. Sometimes we may need to have some strict measures, but we never want to shut down the channels for communications and try to maintain a path of collaboration and cooperation. This is the only way we could work together with countries that are going against it. We have a parallel approach. We do not want to instill a sense of caution that tends to be for very strong hold positions of other countries. So in Japan, we want to run alongside the countries in their voluntary efforts. In 2011, the UN had agreed on the guiding principles on business and human rights. These guidelines are now being respected by many investors and consumers, and it has become a norm for all practicing in business. In the past few years, many of the Western countries have respected supply chain human rights issues to get rid of forced labor and having legal frameworks to support that system. In Japan, last year in February, we also have come up with guidelines, creating guidelines for Japanese businesses. We wanted to have something that would be highly predictable and that would enhance international competitiveness by following the guidelines, and at the same time be able to play in level playing fields and be able to also respect human rights and pursue their business opportunities without violation of human rights. While the government of Japan has been creating these guidelines, we have received over several hundreds of comments and suggestions as inputs, showing the great interest that the public has towards the creation of these guidelines. So Japanese, last September, we were able to come up with the guidelines for respecting human rights in responsible supply chains. And this has been following the international standards, which promotes dialogues with all kinds of stakeholders to analyze risks, to respect it, and also make public their analysis and findings and be able to improve the quality of the business being conducted, the multi-layered businesses that the Japanese enterprises are involved in the Indo-Chinese region. Last September, I went to Vietnam and Thailand, and also to Bangladesh last month, meeting with various stakeholders in these areas, and have given speeches at various UN Human Rights Council and ILL-sponsored forums to talk of Japanese due diligence towards human rights, and that Japanese enterprises, companies will respect and voluntarily work on bottom-up approaches that upholds human rights. And we are hoping that these will also be models for others to follow, and have been receiving high expectations from many in the area. In Japan, these Japanese guidelines hopefully will improve the quality of supply chain, and also would lead to solving some of the tasks, the political and social tasks that the various societies in Asia faces. As mentioned earlier, collaboration with activists, NGOs, labor unions, and various civil society organizations are very important. There are times when we do not really see the actual voices on the ground, or not be able to get the information that is really needed. Sometimes administrative structures are too immature to be able to offer relief measures. So by collaborating with civil society organizations on the ground, we think it will lead us to better solutions and approaches to upholding human rights issues. I know there is also a network being created through the Sunny Lands Initiative, the 1.5 track approach. I am very, very happy to hear that the Japanese civil society organizations, academia, and others are cooperating across the border in this initiative. These small steps, as they may be, are helping to build trust towards the approaches Japan is taking. And I think even though it may seem indirect, the various undertakings to try to protect and safeguard human rights and the universal values can help to alleviate poverty and other global issues, and lead to a richer and more stable political stability in this area. We need to continue respecting the various historical, cultural backgrounds that each country have. And so when the business people operate in various different countries, we would like to see them respecting those differences, and at the same time be able to help the economic growth and development. Japan will be serving as the president of the G7 summit, India, the G20 president, and the US, the APEC presidency. So this year is a very, very special time for us to be working together to bring stability to this area. Nothing can be overcome overnight, but I believe that today, by gathering so many people here today to talk of universal values, we can uphold them and try to defend these values by having all of you involved, engaged. And we hope that the participants to the symposium will be inspired to act and further promote the value that needs to be protected and expanded in this region. Thank you.
誠にありがとうございました。お忙しい中駆けつけていただきました。
And next, we would like to introduce Ambassador Emmanuel. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to, after I speak today, because I have people from America back at the house, I have to go, so I apologize up front. I want to thank you for your comments, for the invitation. If I could, I just want to have one slight disagreement. I say that as a middle child, just a little disagreement. Because all of us believe that democracy is in retreat. I don't believe that. I don't think when the kids were on the streets of the country of Georgia, democracy was in retreat. Something that's close to my family, when you see people demonstrating in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, I do not consider that democracy in retreat. When people went to the streets in Kazakhstan for their own freedoms, I did not see democracy in retreat. Close to home, when you saw the kids years ago in Hong Kong taking to the streets, protesting, there is no way you can say democracy was in retreat. And it's not democracy, which is a process, a political process. There are three things that hold us together and glue countries that respect freedom, the rule of law, and the respect for the individual. It is those principles that we uphold. The democratic process is the way we enshrine them. And I don't believe, for all of us who have freedom, the respect for the individual, and the respect for the rule of law that holds all of us accountable, we take that for granted. We forget sometimes the gravitational pull that freedom has to a young woman in Tehran. We who take it for granted, freedom, the respect for the rule of law, forget the gravitational pull that freedom has to the kids in Hong Kong. So I know it's common. There is a conflict. There is a disagreement on the way forward. But for all of us who experience freedom, for all of us who live in a system in which the individual and their expression is respected, for all of us who understand a system built on the premise and the principle of the rule of law, we should not lose confidence in what only we have, but how it draws people from around the world to flee Moscow and St. Petersburg, to stand up in the streets of Tehran and say no, to go to the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and say not an inch forward, to go to the streets in the country of Georgia and say, we are not letting you do that. And if you look at the history of Ukraine, the reason Russia has decided to both invade Crimea in 2014 and then invade Russia now is because each time the people of Ukraine have said they want to be part of a system that respects freedom, respects the rule of law, and respects the individual. And that all of us who have a role to play should not lose confidence in what we have, because people will willingly lose their lives and sacrifice their families to be a part of that. So I have a slight disagreement, just very small. Democracy, freedom, the rule of law, the respect of the individual is not in retreat. And if you want people to join it, you have to be confident of what you have. I do not see people fleeing to go to Beijing. I do not see people picking up out of Armenia and going to Tehran. If it's so seductive of a political system that has such a bright future, tell me why nobody is getting in a car, driving in a caravan to go to Tehran, to go to Moscow, to go to St. Petersburg, to go to North Korea. Because there's nothing those political systems offer people. What holds Japan, the United States together, we have our differences, we have our disagreements. Our political systems aren't the same. But we share a common set of principles and ideals that over the generations have brought our two countries together, that others want to beat a path to our front door. They not only want to beat a path to our front door, They want to beat a path to our back door. They want to beat a path where they lift the window up and they walk through the window. That is not happening in the countries that repress, oppress their own people. So not that we shouldn't lose sight of the things that we need to improve. We have things to work on. All of us have an attempt to be a more inclusive society where people of different values, different sexual orientations can be a part of that. We have work to do to live up to our ideals, but never lose confidence of the fact that people around the globe, around the world, who don't have it, do not go and seek and leave on a long journey away from their family to be part of a political system of oppression. They will take that journey to freedom. They will never take that journey to oppression. They will take that journey to the rule of law versus the rule of one man and the raw exercise of power. And if it's between rules versus raw exercise of power, the future lies with the rules and the rule of law, the respect for individuals, and the upholding of the honorable pull of freedom as a gravitational pull. And don't ever lose confidence of that. And Japan, I am not here to give Japan direction about how to do that. But I don't think you as a country, now this is one who studies politics, so I'm taking my ambassadorial hat on and putting my old chief of staff hat on here. In the region of the Indo-Pacific, the country with the greatest political capital is Japan. Through 70 years of development, economic investment, diplomatic work, Japan has tremendous, what was termed by Joseph Nye, soft power, because you have been seen as a friend of the people around the Indo-Pacific, as an investor in their future, in the future of their children. So it's my own view that Japan has a tremendous role to play. Now, we in America have a battle in our politics between a Wilsonian view of foreign policy and a more realpolitik view espoused by Henry Kissinger. And if you look at American history, it goes back and forth between those two. But in the last 70, 80 years, Japan has built up quite a level of goodwill in the region. It's respected. It's looked to. It's not seen as in the orbit between the United States and China, or United States, China, and Russia. It's seen as somebody that is a partner to that country's not only independence, but its future, and willing to invest in it. That is a tremendous asset to be deployed in conjunction with and in partnership on behalf of the advocacy, not just of freedom, the rule of law, the respect for the individual, but to strengthen the institutions of civil society that upholds and advances freedom, respect for the rule of law, and the respect for individuals. You have a unique place, not just in the Indo-Pacific, but a unique voice in the Indo-Pacific on behalf of those ideals. Not for somebody from the United States to give Japan direction. You would not have the type of respect in the region, the type of admiration in the region, if you didn't also know how to exercise that political support. You have done in the past, in the last 70 years. But my view for all of us, and this was the basis of something I talked about yesterday at Tokyo University on economic coercion, don't lose sight of what appeals about the United States, Japan, and the free world. We have a big debate in the United States. Some people advocate or echo what President Putin says about NATO moving east was a precipitation of the decision by Putin to invade Ukraine. I have a different view. NATO did not move east. Poland, Czech Republic, Romania moved west. They decided they know Russia. They didn't want that to be their future, so they joined the ideals and the institutions and the association of the West. Have you ever noticed the countries that are closest to Russia, China, while they know they're in the neighborhood, don't like them as neighbors? Kazakhstan, Armenia, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, Lithuania. I'm just showing that I know the map. They know Russia. They know Europe. They join the West because they know what a future bears where Russia is the dominant player in their future. Here in this part of the world, India, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, Singapore, you know what an untethered China is. It doesn't exactly, it may be in the neighborhood, but it's not a great neighbor. So in the decision that we all share together, what we have to do, we have to work constantly on behalf of, not lecturing, but helping countries, civil societies, free press, and individuals find the support they need to build a society and a country and a political system that upholds three principles. And to me, it's the principles that are important, not the process. The principles are freedom. The principles are the respect for the individual and the acknowledgement that the rule of law versus the raw exercise of power is the right way to go. So this forum could not come at a more important time, not just as Japan leads the G7, but as the United States also in November will be hosting the APEC conference, and our collective friend India was hosting the G20, a discussion about the ideals and the values that bind us together and the process in which we achieve that is an important part of not just today's conversation, but putting a guiding light towards the future. Thank you.
エマニュエル大使、誠にありがとうございました。大変心強い。
Thank you, Ambassador Emmanuel. Thank you very much for all the encouragement. And I think the ambassador is to leave this venue. And the purpose as well as the framework of this project, we'd like to brief you. And we'd like to call upon Ambassador Takasu, as well as, in fact, the special permanent, well, former special permanent representative of Japan.
Thank you. I'd like to explain the prospectus, the agenda of the symposium today. I know today is a very busy day for the Diet members, pressed for time. So I would like to have first receive comments from the Diet members after my short presentation. As Ambassador Emmanuel had just said, democracy is not on retreat, that we should not lose confidence because freedom, respect for individuals is really of universal value. Right in front of us is the big issue of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What can we do? There are many things, but closer to our theme today, I think it's the rule of law. That is very important. It's the international community and also within individual countries that we respect the rule of law. For the international community, it's the United Nations guidelines that apply, that we do not want to change the current situation by force. How we try to avoid that situation. And within each country, we need to respect freedom of speech and space for civil society activities, or rule of law being ruled by law rather than the rule of law. So there's no check and balance. And under such a situation, the leaders, authoritarian rulers, can be violating many things. but there's nobody to check them. In such countries, we need to check those in order to maintain international stability. So we would like to focus on the latter aspect, and hear from different perspectives how we can tackle the challenge, and also express our expectations for the Hiroshima G7 summit. You have before you the printouts of the presentation. But for the online participants, please look at the screen. This Indo-Pacific region where we live, what is the situation with safeguarding the universal values? Last year, I went to the annual conference of Asia Democracy Network. We talked about how we can maintain democratic values. And there were about 20 countries represented. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have ran towards authoritarian rules, and civil society organizations' activities have been restricted. Only 6% of populations in Asia have any freedom of expression and assembly. So it's very, very important how civil society organizations and media could be supported in order for them to be able to freely conduct their activities. Last August, JCIE, Japan Center for International Exchange, had organized the Sunnylands Retreat number 2 in Odawara, Japan. On that occasion, Honorable Nakatani and Ambassador Emmanuel were also present. On that occasion, we talked about safeguarding the freedom, democracy, and rule of law, but at the same time also understood that it is important for us to support the civil society. And we agreed on 3 things. The first is that to urge governments to raise the priority of their support for universal values in developing cooperation and national security strategy. And the second point was that we need to strengthen the civil society and media and strengthen measures in order to protect them, and not only pursue what we have been doing previously, but perhaps even think of establishing a new funding mechanism. And the third point we had agreed on was to address the urgent needs of displaced activists. Let me explain about these 3 points. Last year in December, the national security strategy of Japan had been revised. And of national interest, we have also incorporated freedom, democracy, respect for fundamental human rights and the rule of law, and also international order based on international law. And in order to maintain and develop this free and open international order, we would try to show leadership in showcasing a model in the Indo-Pacific region. In English, it's much more clearer. It's clearer in English about the positioning of Japan in protecting university values and the fundamental principles. How we strengthen our position. Our next step is to revise the ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, and strategically utilizing ODA. So protection of human rights was also very strong aspect incorporated. Next step we had proposed was establishing the Indo-Pacific platform for universal values. We have thought of using JICA's activities to further promote democratization. The ODA allocated to this activity is only about 3%, which is not sufficient enough. But what is difficult is that civil society activities cannot be supported without getting an official request from the government, since it is a bilateral agreement extended. For countries other than G7, there are many countries that offer funding mechanism outside government support that does not need to come through the government. So we have been trying to think that if Japanese CSOs also create a platform, we have all the participants of that platform joining the symposium today, but the government needs to be supportive of the activities by funding the activities of this platform. For the democratization process support, Professor Ichihara will be covering that later on. And as the president of the G7 Hiroshima Summit, it is very important for us to explicitly call for protection of universal values. We are expected to be very explicit in our actions. 2 years ago at 2021, the UK presidency had announced a very clear message on universal values about open societies statement. And last year, under the German presidency, it was the resilient democracies statement that also made a very clear message on protection of universal values. So in Japan, we need to protect the rule of law, prohibiting changing the situation by force or power. And so we would like to promote given the highest priority to the rule of law, and also respect for freedom. So last year's German presidency, we need to have a stronger message that will now go back on the resilient democracy statement announced by the German government. So if we may have some comments from the floor by the Diet members, please. Thank you. I'm sorry, I have a meeting starting at 4 o'clock. About democracy, my thoughts are there's a conflict between democracies and the authoritarian rule. And it's not that we're losing confidence, but how can we convince those under authoritarian governments feel that it's better to be democratic? For communist countries, having seen democratic countries' citizens, if they feel that they seem richer, happier, then it's not through war or invasions. It's just showing that we can have better lives, that the people in the other countries feel that they want to aspire to be like that. I think that is very important. And so we have FOIP and other mechanisms that seem to promote the differences, but I think it is more important how we could be more appealing in showing that people in the democratic countries can lead a more fuller lives. So at the G7 summit, it's not trying to support Ukraine in terms of the conflict, but rather how can we bridge the differences to make people understand the importance of the democratic values. And I hope that the discussions will center more on trying to move away from conflicting views, but how appealing it can be to be on the democratic side. I'm very sorry for coming in late. I have only attended from midway, but there's the Russian invasion of Ukraine that has illustrated the importance of democracy, freedom, and human rights issues. I think it has made us realize the values of them. Historically, it has really made all of us in Japan and others to understand their universal values. On the government side, this should not be thought a government issue to be tackled, but all of the citizens in Japan needs to feel that it's their own issue. So protecting universal values in the Indo-Pacific region, freedom, democracy, rule of law, I think we need to engage all the people, the public, the media, and share with them the universal values. So it is something we need to have greater cooperation from the media. And hearing your views about trying to establish a platform, I think that is very important, and I appreciate those points raised. Thank you very much for your comments. I would like to raise them later on in our panel discussion. So now I would like to move on to the symposium and ask the panelists to move up to the front of the room. If you could give us a moment to set up the panel discussion and have the panelists come up to the front of the room. So we would now like to start the panel discussion. We have 4 panelists. Let me first introduce the panelists. Next to me is Professor Kimitoshi Wakabayashi, the Executive Secretary of Think Lobby. My name is Wakabayashi. I would like to comment as a representative of the NGO. Next is from the legal side is Mr. Yabuki. Is a partner at the Yabuki Law Offices, specializing in international laws. I have been involved in rule of law since 1995 in the Asia region, and would like to give my comments based on my experiences. Representing from the academia is Professor Ichihara of the Hitotsubashi University. My name is Maiko Ichihara. I am studying on the democracy and have been involved in the Sunny Lands Initiative as well. And next, from the business perspective, is Ms. Zenia, who is the Group Chief Sustainability Officer of Mitsubishi UFJ Financial Group. Thank you very much for being on the panel. My name is Zenia. I am in this position since last October. But before that, I was involved in sustainability issues at a different insurance company. And I have also been involved in the government's committee in sustainability issues. So may we start with Mr. Wakabayashi. I am leading the JANIC, an NGO association. So have been involved with various, I have had experience in various different sectors and would like to incorporate all of them in presenting my presentation. Those who Civicus, there's only 3.2% of the worldwide population that can freely act and speak. In Taiwan and perhaps Korea. Other than that, it is very, very deteriorating rapidly. So it's a very big issue for us to be tackling. The civil societies, government, media. Government has the responsibility to protect human rights and businesses, but there is also roles that each sector can play. They can complement each other. Sometimes they might be antagonistic to each other, but other times by collaborating, they could be complementary. So let me pick up some of the aspects. Civil society has an independent position from governments and can operate beyond national boundaries and be involved in collaborative efforts internationally. So recently we have collaborated with a Chinese NGO. From the government perspective, that might be questionable, but there are NGOs in China that want to protect human rights for the Chinese people. And so it's not about government to government. We need to be on the ground, and through that NGO, by collaborating with NGOs that are interested in protecting human rights, by having such cooperative relationship, we can help them select what kind of activities they want to promote, what kind of rights they want to protect, and what they want to do in their own country. So I think we have a role in being able to have that liberty to help. So we had imparted our lessons and experiences to them. So that is the freedom we have. And media also has its role. They might be closer to the civil society in terms of position. There is a lot of denouncement rules, the legal framing that rules the... But governments have not the right to regulate the media. So diet and committees within the government should not be involved in regulating, because in Japan, I think it's rather unique. We need to have a third party that decides on the legal frameworks surrounding media. I had served in the House of Councilors myself. So from my own experience, politicians, I don't think it's unique to politicians, but we like to think of our own interests, and we need to be more objective in terms of seeking the rights of others. There are 120 countries around the world that have governments don't have the independence to decide on human rights. So United Nations have some regulations. There aren't enough discussions going around to have a separation and independence of the government involvement in making rules. The universal values, I try to put in the public institution that promotes universal values. It's a corporate social justice project. First, it was about democracy. Originally, the project that I promoted with some universities was about democracy and business. But for business, the concept of democracy is way too vague and too big. So we have now decided on the corporate, what businesses can contribute in terms in peaceful and fair society. So it's the behavior of companies that might be regulated by governments. And so how can governments retaliate or go beyond the controls? And what can business be doing to improve the situation, especially in the Asian region? So we are trying to study groups on what we don't want to impose on business what to do, but we need to have them voluntarily engaged in making up the checklist on what can be done, what roles can be played. Businesses have a big role to play economically, but the businesses did not really know the power they have, but having that power also makes them need to be responsible for the power they have. So we are now trying to get the businesses to become aware, and we are now like to tell that each of the sector has its own responsibility and a role to play in promoting democracy and safeguarding universal values. So next, I would like to talk about good governance and the rule of law. My involvement has been Cambodia mainly, but I've also been to Africa, Latin America, and various other countries. So, and good governance and rule of law come hand in hand. The role of government, it should be strong, because otherwise it cannot promote ways to improve the society. So we need a strong and efficient government. But at the same time, it also has to ensure autonomous justice. It has to be transparency, integrity, accountability, equity. And when all those aspects cannot be expected from the governments, we need balance system, a check and balance system from external forces. And in a democratic system, it is the various branches of the governments, including the election rights, the democratic values, that achieving a fair and honest government through democratic principles is the legislative branch, and trying to achieve a legitimate government and rule of law through fair trials is the judicial branch. And beside that, societies have the rule of law, where the civil society and also the economic or business sectors, private sectors. Right now, the business and civil societies are attracting a lot of attention for the important role they could be playing, especially the civil society. If they play an objective third party, then they could promote the rule of law. In this triangle, in order to have a strong and efficient government that is supported by a legitimate government or the judicial branch and the legislative branch, then the rule of law will be the transparency and fairness in processes. And at the same time, it should have rationality of substance that ensures human rights. Those are the core values or rules of law. So to do so, it's the judicial branch and the legislative branch. In order to make this triangle operate in an efficient way, is the role of the legal professions that give proper advice. This is if we take a nation A as one example. If it has good government with executive, legislative, judiciary branches in operation, then we have the good governance achieving nation, but it's the economic institutions and the non-economic institutions. That includes the civil society and media. And those three all need to cooperate and work together in a complementary manner. And that, by collaborating with other countries, it will be the global governance that is the shared values. So this will be a global format. Businesses have global networks that could contribute to this global governance. And so I think it's the legal professionals that could give the proper advice to promote the triangle, a healthy triangle.
So I'd like to take a bird's eye view to give a picture, a bigger picture in a sense. The situation that democracy finds itself for the last 15 years was in strife. But for the last year, I think the situation has slightly changed, or it's becoming more complex, in other words. For democracy, there are positive and both negative impacts. Of positive impacts is that dictator Putin has invaded Ukraine, and dictatorship, as well as transparency and accountability lacking governance-wise. This has been raising the appeal of democracy as people around the world have been more aware of it. And also in China, zero COVID policy has been overnight turned around. And various issues, including the explosion of COVID, in fact, has occurred. And for that, the appeal of democracy has enhanced. And the backside of that coin, however, does also indicate difficult issues as well. In order to protect democracies, we are seeing a tighter or stronger collaboration between democracies, as well as, in fact, there is a closer link between, democracies as well as security. And this may also invoke confrontation amongst nations as well as political systems, which people are becoming more aware of. Ukraine, for instance, by the collaboration of democracies, Ukraine needs to be protected, which I believe is valid and true and that we need to focus on. However, in fact, the collaboration is very difficult. And Global South is retreating a bit because they notice the risk, because they don't want to get caught in the confrontation amongst nations. And democracies that are more open, in fact, they are retreating to a certain extent, not to be engaged deeper. And should we give up freedom in the world or democracies? That is not the case, absolutely not. As Ambassador Emmanuel has said, in fact, human fundamental desire, in fact, seeks freedom. As you can see, demonstrations are expanding. And for the last 5 years, we've seen more demonstrations around the world. Demonstrations, of course, are urging or seeking and pursuing freedom, of course. Not only in democracies, but also we see a rising number of them in non-democracies. And 80% of in authoritarian countries, we do see freedom protests. And these protests or demonstrations seen in greater numbers, the same applies for Asia, likewise in Hong Kong, Myanmar, and Thailand, as well as in Afghanistan. And the region that we live in, we see it occurring. And this has confronted us with very difficult challenges or issues. Those who are ordinary people who just pursue peace, for instance, academics as well as journalists, but they are actually are displaced internally within their country or may have to be forced to leave their country through persecution. And the countries have been receiving those displaced people, but of course the capacity is not sufficient because we see so many uproars of protests. And where does this lead to? Refugees' rights, in fact, are not assured in various countries, and there's a trend that neighboring countries, Turkey, for instance, as well as Thailand in Asia, they are not a member or a signatory to the Refugee Status Convention. For instance, in that case, well, technically that would mean that you are in the country illegally, and it's very difficult to receive any public support. And how do they make livelihoods, those refugees, then? And in various levels, there is, in fact, actually buying a position or a place. Bribing is very rampant. And those who pursue peace or freedom, how are we going to protect their lives as well as their dignity? And at the same time, in countries where freedom is not taken for granted or less taken for granted, bribing or bribery, for instance, the issue, how can we actually work around it as well? So we have to approach those issues together. At the same time, that is. And what we need to do for that is through public networks or official networks, relieve those people. And in order to do that, we need various actors to collaborate and to come up with a system that upholds it, of course, is required. And that's what we are exactly trying to do now. When talking about Asia alone, in fact, we're the only region that doesn't have a system that supports democratization. Of course, this is on the backdrop of Asia has been safeguarding the principle, in other words, of not interfering into domestic politics. And Asians, of course, are interested. I'm not denying that the Asians are not interested. I'm not denying that the Asians are interested, in fact, in respecting human rights as well as freedom, as well as the rule of law. And we have been relieving various activists in Asia as well, but that was mostly done individually to date. But through the Sunnylands Initiative, those individual activists, including myself, we're trying to develop a network out of them, or of them, which includes journalists as well as politicians, as well as activists, as well as those who have promoted the freedom movement. We're trying to host as much of them to the extent possible, and those who have insights or information, as well as those who have the support network on part of NGOs, we're trying to collaborate with them to come up with a framework organically to build a network in approximately 180 regional NGOs, and we have identified around close to 100 individuals that we can cooperate with. And on top of that, we need, of course, governmental support on acquiring visas, as well as transportation for evacuation, as well as funding of support, of course, that I mentioned earlier. And in this form, by collaborating with civil society, protecting freedom as well as protecting the people, continuing on that passive activity. In fact, democracy and collaboration with security, I think to break through of that constraint, it would be helpful as well. Because it's government versus government, for instance, otherwise. So adding a civil society layer would make it more multi-layered, and a regional network for democratization would not only protect human rights as well as actually self-esteem, and in a sense would help building a peace and stable international society. So thank you very much for speaking in specific terms. So now from here, Zenia-san, please. Thank you. And just briefing you on the situation surrounding businesses for the last 10 years or a decade. Financial institutions, for instance, we were based on financial statements. However, since a decade ago, as you are perhaps aware of, ESG investments as well as sustainable finance have been providing a context that businesses rapidly are strengthening their foothold in these areas. It started from climate change, how to arrest it, and still remains so perhaps. But with COVID, including human rights, how businesses could socialize their agenda has also gathered more traction. And as there were various comments previously, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, business emergency countermeasures, of course, are also being assessed. And businesses have to also prepare themselves for a security crisis or supply chain disruptions, in other words. Especially, I'm aware that human rights protection is the primary topic here, but I'd just like to give some examples of how businesses are addressing it. First, geopolitical risk for businesses, how or where we're going to operate out of where is an issue amongst businesses, as well as the Japanese businesses are not limited to locating their businesses within Japan, but also in various parts of the world. And human right potential risks that were not revealed earlier in those areas, for instance, with the change of administration, for instance, some countries are being now relabeled as non-human rights respecting countries. And we actually do provide local employment on part of businesses. And in a sense, of course, businesses are supporting the wellness of the local people or the residents in that way. And therefore, from shareholders as well as from outside the country, there are an increasing number of cases that question whether a certain business should be operated out of certain non-democratic countries. Unless you retreat, or unless the business retreats, to a certain extent, we can respect the human rights of your employees. However, if you're going to retreat your business out of that country, you can't be irresponsible. And of course, in terms of businesses, it would be beautiful for shareholders, for instance, if you're going to retreat from that country. Under the question, because you can clear up your position. However, in various cases, Japanese businesses have the tradition of seeing their employees as part of their family. And of course, if your business is going to retreat, you need to have the business acquired by another business, or you need to sell off the business. And would that acquirer of the business really be friendly to human rights is not assured. So that's a question that remains open. And therefore, the questions aren't clearing up all of a sudden or overnight, that is. So there are actually issues that are related to continuing the business in that certain country, and in the case also of retreating your business by selling it off as well. As well as there are issues that relate to the supply chains, of course, as the special advisor said earlier in his opening remarks. And of course, supply chains are a huge challenge, most naturally. On part of businesses, we have multi-layered supply chains. And to what extent could we really control as businesses our supply chain is a question as well. So I think in the case of countries producing cotton, for instance, if the country as a whole is violating human rights, even if so, the businesses are respecting human rights, even by operating in such a country. And however, businesses actually are negatively assessed just because they have their operations in that country alone. Is that really true or not needs to be questioned as well. So we should actually figure out how we can work around this issue. And most recently, related to climate change, there are various regenerative power generation facilities that have been built. And acquiring a site, of course, it's attracting a lot of discussion or argument against whether human rights are really being respected in terms of land use and land acquisition for certain site acquisitions. And of course, it's becoming more of a common norm that you need to be respecting equity, and therefore we need to keep those factors in mind in operating our businesses as well. And supply chain related issues. Of course, supply chains are most important for major businesses, but of course, the upstream major businesses is also an issue for them, but also the downstream smaller businesses for them. If they're asked to respect more human rights, of course, given the capacity that they have, as well as the experience of their people, they may not necessarily have the capacity to respect human rights overnight. And also, collaboration between businesses, I'm quite positive about that, because as mentioned earlier, the world is changing, values are changing, and therefore, I think we can't actually say that everything will still the same for the future. But of course, supply chains included might be areas where businesses are getting to realize what they should do or what they need to do more. And of course, it does not guarantee, however, that the businesses could adopt new strategies, but getting the businesses aware to those issues would, in fact, improve things, perhaps. So we need to be open on that as well in educating businesses. So last but not the least, I've mentioned several examples, how to respect human rights better or more. Of course, businesses do have a desire to be more friendly to human rights. and to respect them more. But of course, there are actually questions that the businesses are asking themselves on what actions need to be taken. And therefore, we ask for the government to provide various elements of support that the businesses really need. And of course, if businesses are assessed in the true sense to their efforts, I think that would tell their businesses, that they're doing the right thing, which is also required to have that assessment, fair assessment. And also centered around Europe, we have more actually business guidelines or in Europe, actually, we do see some due diligence advancing further by having a forced retreat. And there are certain operations that still remain in those areas that you should retreat out of, which is expanding in Europe. So we also need to take that into account as well. Thank you.
If there are questions, comments from the floor, maybe we could group together a few. Perhaps Honorable Fukuyama from the German embassy. Klaus Witte. Germany was the G7 president of last year, so your comments would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, Takasu Taishi. And I mean, when we took up this topic on our G7 presidency, we changed the way of thinking a little bit in the direction of a more resilient democracy. And that was also an expression for our worries that democracy is in danger. We see this in Europe, we see this in many countries, that we have this fundamental principle of democracy as government by the people always being in danger to going in the direction of a more populist direction of politics, which means moving from well-informed policy making to disinformed, to a kind of opinion making based on more on information which is appealing to what people want to believe. That's not absolutely not new. We all knew that Roma Republic 2,000 years ago was destroyed by absolutely the same process. Yeah, so maybe that's a system inherent danger which we have to be aware of, but that is taking new forms today, because we have the tendency to treat information more as a tradable good, which is sold, and that is somehow enforcing this process, because what people want to buy, they want to buy what they like, yeah? And so there's an additional energy for this kind of populism, and that gets even this new technological basis, which is reinforcing this process. And we see this in many countries, how dangerous this can be. So the democracy will never strive on its own. It always needs people, it needs organizations, it needs citizens who see the dangers, who are acting against all the forces who put democracy into danger from the inside and from the outside. And I think on Friday I attended the Tokyo conference of Genron, and they had a very interesting poll. They asked many people worldwide, so what is your hope? How can this very difficult situation we are in right now, how can that be solved? And you know that more than 50% of people answered this can only be done by putting our systems in our own countries in order to make our appeal strong enough again, so that we can lead by example. So that's the only way. And so it makes me think whatever is it was very helpful. I think so many good ideas. I will get in contact again, because we have also many delegations from Germany coming to Japan with exactly the same questions. So that this kind of thinking is moving people around the world. So thank you for your efforts, and let's think together about those things more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Maybe we could have a comment from Mr. Yabuki later on. Any other comments or questions? If you could also. I am Ms. Yamano from Hitachi Seisaku. I have a question on Ms. Zenya. I have a comment on her presentation there about business, about due diligence, the forced due diligence on trying to enforce human rights, that it's important for businesses to be respecting human rights. And so from the business sector, I share the same ideas. I think it's important to have a legal framework, but if the standards are too high, the business have too much of a burden trying to fulfill the standards. And so the guidelines, there is demerits for having guidelines. When we think of it comprehensively, I'd like to ask what you think about these guidelines. And we'd like to pick up another question before we move on to the responses. My name is South Muhammad from the Japan Eagle Association. In the beginning, Honorable Nakatani had that about the guidelines about businesses and respect for human rights, and that the Japanese government is trying to gather information, data throughout for businesses, Japanese businesses operating in the Asian countries. In Uyghur, according to the analysis, there's a company that creates cameras that monitors the Uyghur people by Chinese authorities. So the company is helping the Chinese with these camera by providing these cameras. And there are some Japanese businesses involved in supplying parts to the manufacturing of these cameras. So in a democratic country, the technology that has been developed in the democratic country should not be exported out to countries that take advantage of the manufacturing facilities in other countries. So you also had mentioned the example of cotton. There are some forced labors that might be enforced in providing cotton. So there are Japanese companies that are trying to respect human rights, but I hear that there are others who are not so very happy about complying with all the strict standards of complying for respect for human rights. I am with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on in my portfolio is also about business and human rights. So, and so your comments, Ms. Zenya, were very interesting. But I have a question to Professor Ichihara. And the ideal of trying to collaborate between civil society organizations and the government to have a cushion in between to promote collaboration. So it's not government to government collaborations. So working at the ministry, I think security and human rights issues are very, very closely interlinked. And in trying to promote democracy throughout the world, and you had said that in the world is seeking democracy, but I think it's also in Japan. We are also trying to seek democracy and trying to incorporate civil society organizations. I'd like to know how exactly we can tie up with civil society organizations. I might not be able to stay long enough to hear your responses, but I would very much appreciate having your views on what are concrete steps for us to be connecting with CSOs. I am with the Refugees Assistance Association, Ishikawa. And thank you very much for this opportunity to hear the various presentations. I have a comment and a questions about to Wakabayashi-san and Ichihara-san about accepting refugees. World out, there are over 100 million people seeking refugee positions, and many from low and middle income countries. There is a need for in order to improve the situation for refugees, there was a global compact that was signed in 2018, so which delineates that various sectors throughout society have a role to play in accepting refugees and ameliorating their situation. In the Ukraine situations, Japan has accepted some refugees directly, but there is also Syria and Afghanistan that universities who have raised their hands to accept them. So how can we enlarge the roles played by different sectors to promote acceptance of refugees and improve their situations? How can we better play a role to help these people? So I'd like to have two more questions before we move on to the responses. Thank you. I am Sugita from the Kyodo News. Thank you for this opportunity. There were various references to strengthening media and supporting media. I am involved in some of these movements, but it's very, very difficult in different countries, including Asian countries. Foreign media trying to, some countries have the media in trouble because of their tie-up with outside international assistance or would tie up with other foreign medias. And so I'm always trying to figure out what would be the best way to cooperate and help and strengthen media in other countries. So your suggestions will be helpful. In the Philippines, there's a case when there was financial assistance from an American organization that led to the arrest of one of the journalists in the Philippines. So strengthening media, supporting media might be a very sensitive issue. Many would want to do it, but for those on the receiving side, it might jeopardize their position, their safety. So I'd like to see what might be some possible ways for supporting media. Thank you. I am a lawyer and doing humanitarian assistance. My name is Kano. Today, the title is about defending universal values in the Indo-Pacific, the role of Japan in the G7 summit. So Japan being the president of G7 summit, and what kind of message we come out of the G7 is very important. The universal values ought to be universal. It's not just the Western society's values. It should be universal. That should be applied to all the people, and I strongly believe in that. So one of the issues I have is when we say universal values, it's always freedom, democracy, human rights, and rule of law. We have those 4 points like a packaged values. But hearing from all the different perspectives, I think that package might be too tight. We are excluding some of the countries that should be inclusively incorporating just because the packaging of these universal values into the 4 points seems to be, although those are the only values that we need to protect. So as Professor Ichar has said, the way I took your message was that the authoritarian regimes and the authoritarian versus democratic regimes seems to overlap with the difference between democratic and non-democratic countries was also the difference between the conflict zones. And so my question is, universal values, we don't need to change them or try to divide them up into different aspects, but for Japan to be coming out with a very strong message to the overseas people, for me, it's the freedom, be able to live a human life. We could be free, but if we don't have enough food to eat, then that's not correct. If we have everything we need, but still restricted in our action, then that's not freedom. So there's freedom, but also responsibility to us that is entailed with freedom. So I'd like to see what kind of points you'd like to focus on in coming up with a strong message from Japan. So there seems to have been many, many comments and questions. So may we first start with the domestic, even within the industrialized countries, is the conflict with populism and threats to democracy. So may we first start with Mr. Yabuki on that? As many people have said, within the national level, perhaps that might be the right word. Depending on countries, the situation is very different. So I think it's very difficult to put into a framework all the different countries but freedom and respect for human rights. Yes, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of media. I think those are very important. I look at all sorts of index. There is a happiness index. When you look at the happiness index, when you look at the happiness index, Japan is very low. And that's because maybe Japan doesn't have as free an environment as we believe compared to other countries. And maybe that's because it's part of the democratic freedom that is not secure in Japan. Perhaps about the regulation about media. Maybe I feel that in the United States, the civil society has played a strong role in regulating the value. There's a lot of criticisms and support given that has led to a greater freedom in expression. And as Ambassador Emmanuel, we need to have confidence in moving ahead with what we already have. But eyewitness, there's a human rights issue. When the eyewitness is by taking photographs of taken by smartphones that individuals have to the eyewitness, they would also be able to analyze the situation. It's a program that is an institute that gathers all the data and gives analysis of the situation. And that is something that is not happening in Japan. Ms. Senya has pointed out, depending on companies, how much we comply with the standards of due diligence on human rights issue. I am not saying that it should not be enforced, but in Japan, the human rights issue, it just started in the past few years. But worldwide, there has been a rapid interest in trying to pursue this. And so Japan needs to show greater leadership. It's not that I have an answer for it, but I think it's about time Japan shows leadership in this area, that the government leads the movement so that it will be easier for the businesses to follow. Businesses alone cannot be showcasing models, so I think it would be helpful to have the government take the lead. There's also a point about the Uyghur. About the report. I read the report myself. I think it's a very complicated issue. There's not much I can say on a personal level, but as a business in Uyghur, in the district of Uyghur, if it's very difficult to get evidence that these companies might be involved. So I think these businesses would need to comply with human rights standards and try to maintain its position. So it's very difficult to prove that they are not violating any of the rights of the people or taking part in a violation. I have lots to say, but about the G7. We are doing a civil society organization. There are civil 7, and we're trying to come up with a policy pack with recommendations to the government. And the biggest thing about the business, there is on trying to get a legal framework to make sure that business, civil society, how we make an efficient and effective system that would get rid of forced labor. And it's important to have a legal system framework that is a voice, a collective voice of the world. So even in Germany, they had to have a legal framework first to be able to install the standards. The playing level field, having a level playing field is very important for ensuring competitiveness, but also being able to comply with the standards. So state-sponsored legal framework is very, very important. So the civil society is working on that, trying to make sure that there's concrete actions. And Japan is also very, very strong on human security. But how the government is going to promote human security, there's no concrete steps that have been shown. So I think we have to put in a package there as well. There's the rule of law, but there's nothing yet that's concrete. So what are certain aspects? There's no breakdown on different aspects of the universal values about the rule of law. So if I may just add to that, Professor Ichihara, please. Yes, very good points raised. I'd like to bring about 3 points. One is narrative and focus on the public, and multi-stakeholder approach. From the German embassy, there was the importance of having an appeal. How much appeal a democratic country could show. The stability, development, the advantages of having a democratic country. I think I agree with you. If democracy, when in operation, is best for economic, political, social stability, but the behavior of people seeking liberty, freedom, that no matter how much you repress people's desire, the more you repress them, the more they would seek freedom. So in the long term, the repression also endangers economic development. And if you look at the longer term, the stability and economic development, the positive impact that democracy has, we need to develop a narrative that is a convincing narrative to win over people. And the second, about the focus on civil society, about the public in Japan or in Asia. Each country, every country is different. There's a different way of people reacting to politics. And we need to find just the right discussion. But it's not the governments we should be focusing on, but the people, how they react. Governments have a political agenda. And the discourse is something that is governed by that government and doesn't necessarily represent all the people in that particular society. So we need, if you want to support a political democratic system, we need to see the society as a whole, the kind of people that makes up the society, and find the best match, the best kind of democracy that will work best for that society. And about universal values raised by Ms. Kanto, I am much in agreement. I think freedom is of the topmost priority. Another aspect from the authoritarian regimes, freedom of expression is democracy, human rights. They seem to take out the freedom. So human rights is switched over to social rights. And if you have elections, it's camouflage to look as though there's freedom of selection. But it's always the freedom aspect that's being slipped out of the discussion. And about the confrontations, the multi-layered, in order to, there are positive aspects to having a multilateral conformity. There's for refugees with the visas, transportation funding, the governments could be in the background. And for acceptance of refugees, it could be NGOs, NPOs, universities. So the more we could hide the government's role, the state, from appearing on the front side, it's easier to accept refugees. And the more we engage the civil society, there is not, as Ms. Wakabayashi had mentioned, there are people who are working in support of people seeking freedom. Tomorrow there's a democratic summit. Last year, Taiwan had become a member, and there was, the media had just highlighted the aspect of antagonism between Taiwan and China, but having many civil society, it became very ambiguous whether Taiwan had entered as a civil society representatives or government officials. And so having lots of civil society representation in a conference or in any undertakings, it lowers the appearance of the governments, and so it's more, the discussions were more focused on the values. And furthermore, on the refugees, there is a lot of divide in acceptance of refugees. There are many NGOs, academia trying to accept refugees, but there are those doing short-term, mid-term, long-term support. And there's also organizations that support politicians, activists, or media. And I think it's important to have a better linkage between these organizations, the refugees themselves. So say in Taiwan, if we have a few activists who have received short-term support in Taiwan, be able to be tied into linked to other support cases. So after the termination of the initial support, the same activists can continue to receive support. And I think that kind of interconnection and network is very important.
Well, in a nutshell, it's about specific operations. So we need to consult from here onwards. So it's not just the media, but to various CSOs. Direct support is banned by domestic law. actually we will be defined as agents, and therefore that would have a backlash on the person that we would like to support, and that is actually the real question. So the government might be authoritarian, but there are actually activists who have continued to remain activists for freedom. However, the question is that no one is interested in terms of building a solidarity or a link with those people. So we need to build solidarity with those people. And the second is we will need to provide neutral support. For instance, it's banned to fund foreign media. However, if we're going to invite media to have a dialogue or to empower them, for them, non-funding activities, various ways could be pursued. Actually, it might be in the end funding, but we shouldn't get into that to avoid the ban. And NGOs, in fact, various transmissions of funding from outside the country to a greater extent have been banned. And the NGOs can't be funded because they can't receive from overseas funding because transmission is banned. But having that network together in Asia, for instance, JANIC is doing that exactly. And in April, we're going to have a Tokyo Forum to actually get attention of the focus from the world on the activities that also relate to a certain extent of what I've talked about earlier in China, because what matters after all in the end are citizens themselves. So to disseminate that message, we're going to have a forum in April. I'm afraid we're approaching the time to close this, but this is an excellent opportunity not to be missed.
ございます。立憲民主党の福山です。
I am Fukuyama of the Constitutional Democratic Party. And thank you very much for inspiring presentations by the other panelists. I thought I should remain quiet because it's such a complicated, sensitive issue. Globalization, the term, has come about in the past 2 decades. And this has involved the human rights as well. But that is being shaken right now. The liberalism that has taken place in the post-war era is also being shaken. So the civil society, human rights, how we can shape the society to show greater respect for these issues. I think our previous discussions in the past years need to be changed. The whole wording is now different. And Japan has a role in sending out strong message in Japan. The government, how we could constructively build a good relationship with civil society organizations is a challenge. And going to Mr. Wakabayashi, the SDGs or LDGDP, there is no legal framework to move the issues forward. In our political arena, how we can try to make the environment more friendly for it. I might be a little bit off focus, but I think it's very important for us to reconsider a lot of things. So let me just make a very rapid summary and also talk about some of the basic order. There is their democracy versus authoritarianism. It's not about choosing democracy. or authoritarian regime. I don't think that's a constructive discussion. I think all of you agree with me on that. It's because if we make people choose, there are so many authoritarian regimes, I don't think we're going to have a very positive result. And on the international level and the national level, in the international level, the rule-based international order is about respecting international order based on the rule of law, and that it's not about changing the order by power or force. And for the non-democratic nations, they say that's an order that has been created by the U.S. and European, the Western ruled order. It's not multipolar. And so there's the argument that challenges our international order. So we should not have no unilateral change in status quo by force. That is a statement that could be supported by even the global South. But when we talk about universal values, we call them universal values. But if you go to authoritarian regimes, they would say that each has the authority to decide on what values they want to uphold. And so universal is not universal according to them. And I think that's our universal question. What are we going to do about defining universal? So the freedom, democracy, rule of law, and human rights, that is the standardized universal values. But how do we... I don't think we should push for democracy, but I think freedom is a very, very important element. And rule of law, that everybody is entitled to follow the rule of law, but not forced the rule by law according to the powerful leader of the country. So, and also about freedom of expression. I think it needs to be operational. It's become a slogan. So when we talk about freedom of expression in this conflicting world, we need to think of what would consolidate our arguments, what would bring us together. So it's the human security is now being discussed at the United Nations. A report is being submitted. I am in charge of compiling that report. And so post SDGs, including climate change, we need to have a concept that respects human dignity, human lives. So we don't want to dilute human rights issue, but I think we need to come with terms that would be more acceptable to everyone living in this world. And some of the suggested messages at the Hiroshima summit, we have invited major countries in the expanded summit that has also including Brazil and Comoros. And so not African countries, but many, many countries in the Indo-Pacific region. So I am a little bit worried about this bit of a biased selection of invitees. But on the rule of law, international order based on rule of law is indispensable, but I think that's a little too ambiguous. That doesn't say it all. So at the same time, I think we need to also have freedom and rule of law within each country. I would hope that that would also include lives and livelihood. And also we need to protect the freedom of expression and opinion. And we need to protect free and vibrant civic spaces. And there are also commitment that should be incorporated in the message and committing to guarding the freedom, independence, and diversity of civil society actors. So I hope that those suggestions you would agree on for me to submit to the government. Thank you very much. Ms. Kano, I am very much in agreement with their suggested messages. Internationally, I think some would object that it's not everybody has agreed to an aspect, but when we come to an agreement, we should all follow the rules, and how we respect those rule of law in each country. I think those should be universal values that should be highlighted, but left to the discretion of each country. If there is no strong opposition, I'd like to issue this as suggested messages. So thank you very much for all your time and participating in this symposium. Thank you very much, Ambassador Takasu and the panelists and all the participants and those online for your participation today. I'd like to declare the symposium closed.